Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Village and to my talk. I'm Abraxas 3D, and you can find me as Abraxas 3D on most social media and on LinkedIn if you'd like to look at my professional credentials. I'm with Open Research Institute. We have an exhibit right over there with a lot of open source digital radio work. We do both technical and regulatory work. And today we're going to talk about synthetic aperture radar. So it is a type of radar. It achieves a much finer resolution than standard radar. Synthetic aperture radar is where the antenna moves and the target is stationary, or where multiple static antennas that don't move measure a moving target, or a combination of both of these things. So the general idea is that you have a moving platform with a radar system, and the movement gives a much larger aperture. One of the most common ways that this is done is on a satellite. So the satellite flies by. It's going to take multiple images aiming at, say, a particular target on the ground. You find the center of each of these images and you process that stack of images. This gives you a very high resolution result. When you do it as shown in the drawing, this is called Spotlight SAR, or Spotlight Synthetic Aperture Radar. Now, one of the very first decisions that we have to make is how to take the series of images. And if you're used to digital communications, then you probably are familiar with samples. Constant time samples, where you sample a voltage or electromagnetic wave at particular intervals, the same interval, is an extremely powerful technique. This is how digital communications works. Almost all of the math is dependent upon you taking constant time samples. In fact, it's required to efficiently mathematically process your digitally sampled data. However, when it comes to synthetic aperture radar, when you're flying by, say on a low Earth orbit satellite, you want a constant angle. So SAR can be more efficiently processed by sampling at a constant angle rather than a constant time. This makes a big difference in the math. So here we have a satellite and it's looking at a target and it's taking images at a constant time. This is at a constant angle. So somewhat non-intuitive. So if you do this, if you kind of embrace this, your math becomes a whole heck of a lot easier. Some significant historical examples of synthetic aperture radar dates back to 1978 at least. And this first satellite was a NASA JPL venture called CSAT. Now, one of the project leads for this just happened to be one of the hidden figure computer women from NASA. It was one of the last major projects that she did. And one of the things about CSAT is, as the name kind of hints at, it was designed in order to attempt to track ocean-going vessels, such as possibly submarines. And the rumor quickly spread about CSAT that it could actually see below the waves, and it could spot submarines simply by looking at the disturbance on the surface of the water. Now, something interesting about this rumor is that successive satellites have never duplicated this result. So probably a rumor, but I've talked to a number of people who insist that it was true. And this particular satellite just happened to be able to do it. Another project is Magellan. This is a NASA mission, and this is to map Venus with SAR, and it was extremely successful. Another example would be the Spaceborne Imaging Radar, or SIR, from the Space Shuttle. This is another NASA mission. And this used synthetic aperture radar over the surface of the Earth. Some very interesting things came out of this project. There was stuff that was found on the surface of the Earth that we did not know about. So a lot of archaeological sites And then some other things that we didn't know about, such as missile silos in Russia, and they were kind of unhappy about us looking at them. But as you know, in science, leaps forward in science are made when you have better instrumentation. And time after time, over the past couple of decades, SAR has proven to be a superior instrument for looking at things. Another one is AIR-SAR. This is a NASA JPL mission. This was kind of a step above the SIR. It could peer into vegetation. It could, again, another big step in resolution over the Earth, causing some discomfort in some circles and some great joy and happiness in others. And then a little more recently, we have the Lincoln Labs LIMIT satellite. And then the literature kind of trails off. The missions are a little more shrouded. So over time, more details about more recent missions will probably come to light. So how do you do this yourself? I mean, because like a satellite's pretty expensive, but you can. And there's a really good practical course. If you're familiar with MIT's OpenCourseware, this is probably the granddaddy of open source learning. And they have a fantastic class. You can see it dates back to 2011. It's been around for a while. And this is like the coffee can radar system. So if you follow this link, it takes you directly to the course materials, and you can build your own synthetic aperture radar system, or coffee can radar. Okay, so what's the problem with all of this? I mean, we have at least one practical thing that we can play with. We can see the advantage. I mean, total information awareness over your environment, being able to reach out and sense things with radio waves. It sounds great. Well, this section of text here, this wall of text, is from the federal code. So Title 22, Chapter I, Subchapter M, so and so and so, and it lists synthetic aperture radar, incorporating image resolution less than or better than 0.3 meters, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And also it lists something called inverse synthetic aperture radar. So, well, okay, fine. So SAR is listed in the federal code somewhere, big deal. Well, this part of the federal code is known as the United States Munitions List, meaning that SAR is listed as a munition. What is this? Well, the munitions list is a list of items that the United States federal government believes are defense or space-related weapons. This includes the articles themselves, services, related technology, and the Arms Export Control Act controls these items. So they're listed in something called ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations. So you'll hear a lot about ITAR if you start to kind of poke around things that are considered munitions. The Directorate of Defense Trade Controls in the U.S. handles ITAR, including the munitions list. Okay, but who cares about that, right? Well, it's all about export. It's all about control of the information. So ITAR regulates the trade, the export or import of all this gear, these items, or the related technical data. So what does this mean in practical terms for hackers? This means if you simply discuss the wrong type of thing in front of the wrong type of person, meaning a non-US person, then you're in violation of ITAR. And there are some very stiff penalties when it comes to ITAR. And with SAR being on this list, gets a little sensitive. So yes, you can get up to 20 years in jail, $1 million fines, and maybe worse for some of us, the "you'll never work in this town again" reputation. Oh, but wait, there's more. So it isn't just the State Department. There's another set of regulations from the Commerce Department. And so we have ITAR from state, we have EAR from commerce. This regulates trade, export, or import of military gear, items, weapons, or related technical data as well. EAR, administered by the Commerce Department. And they have a whole other list, the Commerce Control List. So if you're not ITAR, you might be under EAR. And guess what? SAR is there too. So why do we care? Well, times are changing. Every quarter or so, there's a new software-defined radio. Computers are super cheap. Power amplifiers get more powerful. Tracking systems get better and better. Being able to aim your radar is easier and easier. And all of these enabling technologies mean that playing around with radio becomes easier and easier for us. So you may accidentally end up doing something that's controlled. And like I said, SAR is really, really fun, super cool, and well within reach of pretty much anybody sitting in this room. But so why wouldn't we care? Okay, so why do we care? Okay, but why do we care? Because our community has already been negatively affected by these rules. And here I'll give you two examples. I know there's more out there, but these are the two that I most personally know about. There is a project called Kraken, and this was a crowd-funded RTL SDR ganged system. Yeah, if you're familiar with the Kerberos, Kraken was the next generation. They voluntarily took down an entire GitHub software project based on the Kraken simply because they were afraid that their passive radar system was too close for comfort to SAR. So self-censorship is a big red flag, and it happened. So this was in November of 2022, fairly recent. And my nonprofit, ORI, had a project that wanted to get into radar, and the lead decided, after looking at the situation, to stop and delete everything. So another case of self-censorship. And in both cases, I mean, this is a tremendous way to learn. Things in radar and the processing involved, all the mathematics, is a tremendous boost just in terms of professional development. And it's a very interdisciplinary type of thing. So when you see us start to self-censor because of fear, then we should dig in and find a way forward. And so that's what we did. We hired some lawyers. We looked at this pretty closely to try to see if there was a way out of it. So SAR being controlled under ITAR or EAR does depend on the technical specifications. And it is true, you can't just escape to another country. Canada and the UK have very similar controls on SAR, as does the EU. However, both ITAR and EAR include exemptions for the public domain or for published work, respectively. These are very clear carve-outs. Physical distribution of all the technical information actually covers the public domain exemption in ITAR. If you publish, it must be free. If you publish your design as you go, as you create it, you are in compliance. You're exempt. Physical distribution of all the technical information covers published in EAR if it's freely available to the general public. So it's slightly different interpretation from ITAR to EAR, but still open source is your way forward. You can use a library, a conference like this one, if you distribute your design, a trade show, or even the internet for EAR. The key, if you publish it, it must be free. To take advantage of the public domain carve-outs, you really need to know your stuff. You need to make sure that you're in compliance with what they view as openly publishing something. If you manufacture something, so we've covered like publishing your design, publishing your schematics, your source code, your math. What if you build it? What if you decide to build the best synthetic aperture, truck-based drive down the road system that's ever been built? Well, you have to register with the DDTC, even if you do not export it outside of the country, and even if you only make one article. However, there's an exception here too. If you are engaging in the fabrication of these articles solely for experimental or scientific purposes, including research and development, you're exempt. In other words, if you want to go into commercial work, if you want to make this to sell, and it's proprietary or commercial, you are going to have to do the full-blown ITAR EAR thing. If you're doing this because of the love of it, you just want to hack, you want to share it with other people, you want to publish your design, and you're doing it for research, educational, R&D purposes, you can do this work even though it's on the munitions list. So we've talked about, State Department, and ITAR includes the Department of Defense, includes BIS, EAR includes the Commerce Department. What about FCC? Okay, so we have some trickery here too. So passive radar doesn't require you to make a transmission. Okay, so the regulatory situation for passive radar is actually pretty good. In the US, though, licensees in the amateur radio service are allowed to use pulse modulation. If you read Part 97 very carefully, if you're using pulse modulation, this is actually allowed on the 33 centimeter band at 900 megahertz and above. A lot of people in the amateur service, I'm a ham myself, W5NYV, will tell you that radar is not allowed. You don't do radar on ham bands. So this is your way forward. You can do it if you're using pulse modulation and if you're at 900 megahertz and above. And as long as you're keeping a clean act and doing all of the usual, good citizen things as a ham, you can experiment with this. You can build systems. You can move forward with less fear. Also, unlicensed bands are an option. So I focus on the amateur bands because that's where it's easiest to transmit, where it's the best place to do experimental, scientific, citizen science work. But there are unlicensed bands and that's where you can also go to experiment. For example, the MIT Coffee Can Classroom, that uses 2.4 gigahertz. So don't be afraid. Be open. Quality, open source publishing, figure your license out, dot your I's, cross your T's. That qualifies for these public domain carve-outs. And this is also how we enabled amateur satellite. Communication satellites are also regulated under ITAR and EAR. So we also did a lot of work to make it less scary for people to work on communication satellites. Same deal, the public domain carve-outs were the key. If you manufacture something solely for experimental or scientific purposes, you qualify for that manufacturing exemption. So you should take control of the airwaves with less fear when it comes to things that are controlled. So this talk would not have been possible without Open Research Institute. It's a nonprofit dedicated to open source digital radio. You and your project are welcome. If anything that we've talked about today is of interest, or if you have another open source digital project that you would like to get a little help with, and a 501c3 can be your home. This is our Getting Started page. And thank you very, very much to Zero and RF Village for enabling this and all of the other talks. It's our newsletter if you want to keep up with what we do, including all this regulatory work. All right, any questions or comments? Yes, sir. Yes, the question was about penalties for ITAR violations, and they range from 150,000 to $1 million, depending on the violation, up to 20 years in jail, and a ban from doing things like getting government contracts. If you have to comply with ITAR, there's an excellent webpage that walks you through the process of controlling your data and controlling access to your data, and it reads like a greatest hits list of secure computing. So it's about 10 different things that you have to do. And a lot of companies and people that have to comply with ITAR spend a lot of money outsourcing it, and then somebody else handles the computing environment and handles the intra-team communications. And in the worst case, you're looking at doing development on an air-gapped computer. But the violations it's typical regulatory violations. You won't really know that you're in violation until you get a letter, and you'll get some amount of time to fix it. And if you don't, then the daily fines kick in. So there have been some people that have gone to jail for ITAR violations, but usually these are ruinous penalties and the threat of jail time. So it is no joke. That's why stick to open source, be just ruthless about documentation, and then just assert your rights to be able to do the technology that, SAR is essentially trigonometry. So why should trigonometry be scary and illegal? We think it shouldn't be. And open source is the way around it. All right. Any comments or questions? All right. Thank you so much to everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. I'll be over at ORI's booth. Yeah, and thank you very much to the Village. This is a wonderful opportunity to meet people. It's my favorite part of DEF CON. Thank you.